Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome John Paul Farmer, Director of Technology and Civic Innovation, Microsoft.
Hey everybody, how y'all doing? All right, thanks for sticking it out with the weather and everything else you could be doing on a Friday afternoon. We're excited to have you here for the final session, the final panel discussion of Smart Cities, New York City 2017. And this panel is going to be on training tech talent in the 21st century. And we really can't talk about training tech talent without talking about the skills gap. So right now, there are 5 million unfilled jobs in the United States of America. 5 million. And 500,000 of those jobs are tech jobs. They require specific tech skills. Now, what are they? They're things like web developer, certainly, also data scientist, but there are all kinds of IT specialist jobs, things like cloud and server administration, DevOps, cybersecurity. It's a no-brainer. But the thing is, the needs are not the same in New York City as they are in Albuquerque, as they are in Lubbock, as they are in Denver. Each place has its own specific mix. The skills gap is different in each place. LinkedIn created an economic graph initiative and has been putting out a workforce report. So you can go online and check out the LinkedIn Workforce Report to understand what the skills gap looks like in dozens of different communities. That kind of insight is what led us to create Tech Jobs Academy. This is a program that my team at Microsoft created in collaboration with the NYC Tech Talent Pipeline and one of the local colleges called City Tech. And we built this to deliver those in-demand tech skills, to fill that skills gap, and to bring together a win-win solution for both businesses and people, and New Yorkers, people who often were unemployed, often didn't have a college degree, and were locked out of the tech industry and the high-paying jobs that would otherwise be available. So what was Tech Jobs Academy? Well, it helped New Yorkers who didn't have these college degrees in 4 months of intensive training. You're going to hear the term boot camp a lot today. So it was a boot camp, an intensive 4-month full-time effort where people who were smart and capable but had everything but opportunity could actually get these skills that were in demand. And what we've seen is pretty incredible. What we've seen is that a majority of the grads did indeed seek out full-time tech jobs, and most of them got them. And the average salary is now 4 times what it was before. So in 4 months of training, people can quadruple their earning power. And that's changed lives. So we're really excited about the panel that we have here today because we've got representatives from the public sector, the private sector, and the nonprofit world. And that's the kind of coalition, cross-sector collaboration that has allowed so much progress to happen up to this point. So with that, I would like to introduce our panelists. So first up, we have Lauren Anderson. Lauren is the Executive Director of the NYC Tech Talent Pipeline. Please welcome Lauren to the stage. And next up, we have Liz Simon. Liz is the General Counsel and Vice President for External Affairs at General Assembly. We have a third panelist who is currently stuck on the way here, and hopefully will be joining us midway through, so you will hopefully get to meet Kalila Harris very, very soon. But let's start with the folks we do have. And Lauren, I'm going to start with you. Actually, you know what? Let's go chronologically. Let's go chronologically and start with Liz. Tell us about General Assembly and the journey from the roots of General Assembly a handful of years ago to where it is today.
Sure, absolutely. Well, thank you all for being here. I'm glad to be here on this lovely afternoon. So General Assembly, for those of you who don't know, is a global education company that focuses on 21st century skills. So we started here in New York City just over 6 years ago, and initially GA was a co-working space. It was actually early in the life, if you can imagine a time before WeWork in New York City, and we actually we were supported by the EDC and got off the ground with a grant from the EDC, but part of the ethos of the folks who were working out of our space was that folks were teaching each other skills, and we quickly realized there was a huge demand for people trying to develop their own skills, trying to find talent for their companies as they grew them. And so, we had one classroom, and we started, teaching in the evenings, lots of workshops and sort of practical skills-based training programs. And, flash forward 6 years later, we're now, headquartered here, but in 20 cities around the world. And we've really transitioned fully. We don't do co-working. We transitioned fully into an education company. And the way that we think about kind of what we do is we sit really between the individual who's looking to, upskill, potentially change careers, to really, leverage education they've already had. I mean, the vast majority of our students actually already have a college degree, and they're 30 years old. So these are people who are looking to, figure out how to be more relevant in today's economy, plug into the jobs that are available. And the other side of that is companies who are looking for talent, who are looking to radically retrain their own talent, or who are looking, to upskill so that they can keep pace with digital transformation. And so, we see ourselves kind of sitting right between those things and work directly with individuals as well as companies. Now, access and affordability is hugely important, and so this is a great panel for a lot of reasons, but primarily among them is that we do a lot of work with both Lauren in the Tech Talent Pipeline here in New York, as well as Opportunity at Work, to really think about scholarships and supporting access for folks. How do we partner with government, nonprofits, corporate foundations to really expand access? Because today most people pay out of pocket for a General Assembly class or take a private loan. So excited to talk about sort of the ways that we're thinking about access to these programs and how we think about getting them in the hands of more folks around the country.
Thank you, Liz. I think you mentioned digital transformation, and that's really interesting. The keynote that Tony Towns-Whitley delivered here at Smart Cities on Wednesday, the opening keynote, she talked about digital transformation and how that intersects with corporate responsibility and inclusion. And I think that's one of the things that you focus on, Lauren, really every day through the Tech Talent Pipeline. So can you tell us about the roots of the Tech Talent Pipeline and the things that are going on there today?
Sure, absolutely. So the Tech Talent Pipeline is the city's industry partnership in tech. We were launched about 3 years ago next week, so we're about to celebrate a birthday. And we were launched with the recognition that New York City tech is booming. As I'm sure you've heard, if you were just in Deputy Mayor Glenn's speech or throughout the week, the tech ecosystem here in New York is huge. It accounts for about 300,000 jobs across the whole ecosystem and about 30 billion in wages annually. I'm going to try to compete with the rain, just so you all can hear me. But what the mayor recognized was there is a huge demand. That number is not slowing. It's growing at a rapid rate. In high-tech fields, we expect that growth will be about 30%, according to the comptroller. And there is no shortage of companies wanting to be able to bring on more people to help sustain that growth. At the same time, you have 8.4 million New Yorkers, you have a $500 million public workforce system, you have 125 colleges, you have 1.1 million students in the public education system. I always love to put it in perspective by making sure people know that every one in like 350 people in America is a New York City public school student. So that gives you a sense of the scale. And you can imagine how those massive systems, if aligned with employer needs, could really create a tremendous opportunity for New Yorkers to move into extremely rewarding, high-paying jobs. But all across the 5 boroughs, there are folks who would love to pursue tech careers and just didn't know how to get their foot in the door, either because they couldn't go on the traditional path of a 4-year degree, or because even with a 4-year degree, they did not have the skills that they needed in this rapidly evolving ecosystem to be able to move into those jobs. And across the ecosystem, tech employers also didn't have a clear path into those various systems or infrastructure to be able to deliver talent. So we launched the NYC Tech Talent Pipeline with the goal of delivering quality jobs for New Yorkers and quality talent for the city's businesses. And what that means is we've spent the last 3 years together with our partners across the New York City tech ecosystem building out programs with the goal of specifically taking employer feedback, and in many cases we sit with employers, have their help in designing curriculum or have their help in giving input into curriculum, and from there deliver people into jobs for in-demand occupations. The goal of those programs, though, is not just to connect folks to jobs. The goal is really to understand what works so that we can then take that to scale across all of those huge systems that I mentioned earlier, the 125 colleges, the public workforce system. And we are really excited because in just 3 years, we have started to make tremendous progress together with our partners. And I'm excited to talk a little bit more about examples of that progress and where we're still really excited to be able to mobilize others across the ecosystem to do similar work.
Awesome. So what's interesting is you both mentioned General Assembly's been around for, I think, 6 years. The Tech Talent Pipeline, 3. Happy birthday.
Thank you.
And shortly after that, so about a little over 2 years ago, President Obama announced the Tech Hire Initiative. So this is a White House-led initiative that was really built to focus on the things that both of your organizations had already started to work on. And throughout that process, New York City has been at the forefront. It's been a place that other cities have looked to emulate. And why do you think that is? Why do you think that New York City started earlier? Why do you think New York City has found success? And to what extent is the New York City playbook replicable?
So first of all, we did not pay John to say that, so thank you.
I speak the truth.
So New York City has always been a place that is not one thing. It is many things. It is really creative. And because of that, it has always been a great place for innovation, for not just looking within an industry to see how it can grow, but really looking at what are all of the creative levers that can be pulled across the ecosystem to be able to really connect creative, gritty, amazing, talented New Yorkers who represent such diversity of background, of thought, of perspective, of opinions, to be able to create something new and innovative. We also have had a track record of innovative government and innovative partners who are invested in making New York City a place that leads the way. And for many folks, for all of the 175 companies that we work with, you can see that in their dedication not just to hiring people, but to being part of the New York City ecosystem. Companies that work here in New York are invested in New York because it's a shared identity and a shared experience. And given the fact of our scale and the fact that folks are drawn to that kind of innovation, we have been lucky and fortunate to be in an ecosystem where many of the dots can be connected and many of our individual work can be amplified.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with all of that. I think, for us, we actually are the recipient of 2 Tech Hire grants. So we are part of 2 programs that are funded by, former President Obama's Tech Hire initiative. One is a partnership with a workforce development nonprofit called Perscolis in the Bronx, and one is a partnership with LaGuardia Community College. And so I think from our vantage point, we see, as Lauren mentioned, a landscape of really sophisticated, other training providers, people who are looking to collaborate, who are kind of working towards the same set of goals, which is why it made sense for us to do those partnerships here. And both programs are actually bridge programs where students who come from low-income backgrounds are put through a pre-program, like a 5-week pre-program, and then go straight to General Assembly and feed right into our normal classes with our regular students. And they've been just as successful in their job search as anybody who's paying full freight themselves. And so I think we've found it a natural place for us to experiment. I mean, it's certainly where our headquarters is, where we have the biggest operation, the most experience working, but we also have found that with other providers as well, is that people are really focused on these issues, and companies, as you said as well, are really focused on, I think, more so than in some other places, are really focused on diversifying their talent pipelines and making real commitments to do that.
So Liz, sticking with you for a minute, General Assembly has scaled really better than any other of the so-called coding boot camps. Why is that, and how do you look at the different territories in which you operate, and how do you choose them in the first place? Are there differences in how you operate, or do you think you've cracked the nut on this is how you do it and it's going to work as well in Singapore as it will in New York City, as it will in Quito?
So I would say a couple of things. First, the ecosystem really has to be there, right? So number one, there's got to be jobs. There's got to be tech jobs for people. If we're putting people through training programs that are job preparatory and there aren't jobs for them there, like, nobody wins. So that's number one. There got to be employers who are looking to hire, and the good news is, like, there are tech jobs everywhere. I think that's what we're learning, is that every company is a tech company. Legacy industries are going through these digital transformations, trying to build up tech workforces and having a hard time competing with talent from the Microsofts and Googles of the world. So number one, jobs. Number two, people who have the ability to pay, or a supportive employer or government partner that can foot the bill. So that's another factor, is what's the population like in the city. 3 is size, right? The city's got to be big enough to support where we think the market is large enough for us to be there, or there's some other compelling reason to be there. And 4 is sort of tech ecosystem, even if nascent. What is the support, from the government and otherwise for the tech ecosystem? Is it growing? Is it an attractive place? And so that's how we think about markets. And I would say, the secret to scale is that, it's hard work. There's no substitute for, going into communities, building relationships, executing at every step of the way. And it's a complex operational business, but I think over 6 years we've really mastered that. And the curriculum we teach is consistent across those markets. So we teach the same web development class that we do in New York as we do in Sydney, Australia, and Singapore, and London. And there are certainly local variations that our instructors bring to the courses, but I would say by and large the curriculum is all developed here in New York, and it's largely similar because at the end of the day, there's a lot of consistency around sort of the baseline skills that we feel like folks need to know and that companies are asking for. So that's a little bit how we've thought about kind of expansion, although I will say on the size point, we are actually in partnership with Opportunity at Work, which is a bummer they can't be here today, doing a pilot in Rhode Island, in Providence, which is a very tiny city. It would not have otherwise support a full GA campus, but with the support of Governor Raimondo of Rhode Island, and some funding to help get us started, and some sort of expediting of various regulatory processes that help get us up and running, we were able to stand up a pilot in basically 3 to 4 months on the ground, and with students who are really benefiting from the programs. And so there are some exceptions to those rules that we're open to exploring, and we do, but that gives you kind of a general sense.
Yeah, and John, if I can hop in here for a second. I just want to hop on that last point of the role that the public sector plays in helping really successful entities that are delivering people into jobs, responding to employer needs, in reaching scale. Just out of curiosity, because it's always helpful to know, how many folks in this room are from the public sector? Okay, great. How many folks are working in private sector companies? How many folks are educators? Great. And how many folks are random category that I've missed? Okay, nice to meet you.
So for those keeping score, mostly private sector.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's important to note, because even for the few of you who are public sector, there are steps that the public sector can take in collaboration with private sector entities to be able to support more of this kind of work. In addition to ensuring that this new and emerging field of boot camps, which have really only been around for 7 years or so, are growing in a regulatory environment that nevertheless maintains supports for ensuring students get what they are paying for, consumer protection, et cetera, but doing so in a way that is accommodating rapidly changing curriculum, which frankly governments are not always so good at recognizing or being able to deal with. There's a big role in that regulation space, and there's also a big role in seeding innovation that both the private sector and the public sector can play. Again, General Assembly was started with the help of New York City Economic Development Corporation, which is a government entity. So for those of you who are in the public sector, I would just think through all of the levers that you could possibly have to be able to encourage entities that evolve quickly to meet industry needs, to be able to do so in an environment that helps them do so.
Lots to unpack there. So the first of the many things that were just mentioned by the two of you that I want to get into is where the tech jobs are. There's this misconception that tech jobs are in Silicon Valley and the Bay Area. And the reality is that in the United States, 92% of the tech jobs are not in Silicon Valley or the Bay Area. So they're really all over the country. And they take different forms in different places, yet there's this misperception that, oh, that's not for me. And Lauren, I'd love to hear how you and the Tech Talent Pipeline and your work have dealt with that mentality, that mindset that might be out there of, oh, that's not for me, I'm from the Bronx. Oh, that's not for me, I'm too old. Oh, that's not for me because of my gender or my background or my ethnicity or whatever it might be. How do you get through that?
That is a great question, and honestly, it's a really important question, because if you think about indicators of success in the programs that we run, the number one greatest indicator as to whether or not someone's going to persist throughout a program is, are they passionate about tech? Have they known about careers for a while? Is it something that they've been tinkering with, wanting to pursue, et cetera? And you don't get that kind of exposure in every pocket of the city. And so the first step is figuring out how do you expose everyone to tech careers and characterize tech careers as something that are for everyone. One of the really exciting things that the mayor has spearheaded is ensuring that every New York public school student has early exposure to what computer science actually is and is able to dispel their kind of common beliefs and perceptions as to what those careers are. So in September, not this past year, but the year before, the mayor launched something called Computer Science for All, which guarantees access for every single public school student, all 1.1 million, by 2022. That is huge because what that is meant to do is not create 1.1 million software engineers. It is meant to really teach students what technology is, the role of technology in your everyday life, computational thinking, and yes, some specific exposure that will let a selection of students move on to post-secondary education, training providers that they never thought were a path for them. It also requires ensuring that the alumni of these kind of programs who don't, quote unquote, look like your typical graduate are getting out and talking about their experience. And there are many ways to do that. We have started to work peripherally with some of the counselors within high schools, career advisors, and folks who are may themselves not have a sense of what these careers are and who move into them, to be able to connect with our alumni so that our alumni can show folks, yes, I grew up in Brooklyn, yes, I grew up in the Bronx, and this is absolutely a career I want to pursue.
That's great. And I'll say on behalf of Microsoft, one of the ways that we've been trying to reach out to communities that otherwise might be overlooked or might not see themselves when they think of tech careers. So for veterans, members of the military, we created Microsoft Software and Systems Academy. This is happening on a dozen military bases around the country to help service members get tech skills prior to going back into civilian life. That's one thing we've done. Here in New York City and a number of other cities around the country, we have launched the TEALS program. So TEALS is taking advantage of practitioners, of all these amazing web developers that we have right here in New York and in cities around the country and around the world, and bringing them into schools so that they can both teach kids but also teach the teachers. So we can grow our base of teachers who know how to teach a computer science curriculum by tapping into practitioners first. So those are a couple of the things that we've been really successful with and have allowed us to reach audiences that otherwise might not be included.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that students who come from a non-traditional background who come to GA face is imposter syndrome, right? Which is people feeling like they don't belong and, not necessarily feeling like they don't have the confidence to feel like that they can do what other people in the classroom can do. And I think, the sort of incorporating additional kind of supports to make sure that students are really supported through that journey is so critical, because I think it's really easy when you haven't seen a pattern of people who look like you doing this to feel like, I just can't do it, or this is too hard. And these are very intensive programs that we offer, and so in order for people to persist, I think that passion is key, that sort of grit, determination. Those are things we really screen for as part of the admissions process to make sure that people are going to be able to make it through. But it's certainly a struggle, and it's something we see quite frequently. And I would say in terms of sort of just exposure, we do a lot with the community here in New York and around the world as well. So for example, one thing we do is, one Friday a month, we host what we call like the nonprofit open house day, where we have, any sort of organizations that are working with youth in tech or whatever who want to come sort of check out GA. We always get people reaching out to us. We open up, do an info session on a Friday and let people come in and kind of tour the space, meet with some of our staff. We do like a career panel. And so I think there's a lot of ways, and we've got to be doing more to, really show people this is the path for them no matter where they come from.
So something that Liz brought up earlier, about which I'd love to hear your thoughts, is the question of affordability and funding. So this is an issue for any kind of education. There's a debate going on in the country about the cost of education, the cost of attaining skills and starting your life. One of the challenges for some of these more innovative approaches to delivering skills, coding boot camps and others, is that they're often not eligible for the same kinds of grants or loans that other forms of education might be. Where do you see the funding conversation going? And ultimately, who's going to be footing the bill if we're going to see thousands, maybe millions of people using these more innovative forms of training?
I'm happy to take a first crack, though. Lauren, I'm sure you have many thoughts about this as well. I mean, so you want to know what I think should happen? I think employers should foot the bill. I think at the end of the day, that's where we need to move to a system that's more demand side, where investments are made in the demand side, meaning employers, and they are incentivized to think differently about their talent pipeline, think about the education to employment journey differently than they do today. I mean, I think, sitting here, I don't think, there is a debate going on in Washington about whether, federal financial aid should be able to be used at non-accredited training programs like General Assembly, for example. And we've actually come out publicly against that. We've seen a lot of abuses in the for-profit education industry when federal dollars are at play. And so I think we have to be very, very careful, especially with new models and new programs, to think about, how you would ensure quality if that were to happen. And so I think we're still a ways away from feeling comfortable where we can kind of throw open the floodgates. But, certainly there's lots of opportunities. We are eligible for workforce funding. So individuals who may have access to workforce funding who may be unemployed or, could come to us through a local workforce center and actually use their dollars at GA. So that's one way without sort of opening up the federal floodgates that students can think about access. Now, that may not cover all the full cost of the tuition, but it helps get them there. We are also eligible for GI Bill funding, so veterans can use funding to come, and this is all without accreditation. So I think there are some ways, in addition to sort of some of these big kind of grant programs where we're talking about working directly with a city, to support a particular program or population, which we're doing in New York City, we're doing in DC, we're doing in Providence, as I mentioned, and various other places, LA, San Francisco, Singapore, where they fund 70% of, our students' tuition. But at the end of the day, our big push is that employers need to be footing the bill for the talent that they need. They need to be thinking further out ahead about those talent needs, and that will be the best way to really further connect the education and employment ecosystems as tightly as they need to be as we go into the future of sort of a changing job market and uncertain, times.
Sure, absolutely. So I completely agree with everything Liz said. I think that there is a role for government funding, certainly, especially in an ecosystem where individuals would not necessarily be the immediate folks that would meet employer needs right away, and there is a role for government funding to play in helping those individuals get in the door. But more broadly too, I think one big macro level thing that would be very helpful in all of this when we're talking about funding is to recognize that in many cases, whether it's public funding or philanthropic funding, funding is often tied to indicators that just don't make sense anymore. They're not what industry is telling us is needed. So for instance, here in New York City, the way that we started the Tech Talent Pipeline was by sitting down with an advisory board that includes companies like Microsoft, Facebook, Google, et cetera, as well as small businesses here, to identify what they really need. And across the board, we did not hear once in those conversations, and have not since, that you need a traditional certification, the way that many other cities across the United States depend on to be able to indicate what kinds of credentials people should achieve in order to be successful in the workforce. Our employers told us, no, we need people who can get things done, who are aligned to our needs, who can build things, who can prove that they have these skills, and it's not always a piece of paper that says you've been certified. And so what public funding streams, philanthropic funding streams need to recognize is that there are other indicators, namely outcomes. How are people actually faring? What is industry saying is needed, and how are educational institutions incorporating that are more important, where there's a huge opportunity for funders to actually switch the way that they think about funding and hold providers accountable for delivering it.
Excellent. So I'd like to pause and do two things. First of all, remind you that there is a hashtag that you can use on social media, SCNYC17. So if you hear anything interesting, share it with the world. And secondly, I'd like to welcome Kalila Harris. Kalila is the Chief of Staff and Vice President of External Affairs at Opportunity at Work. And Kalila, welcome. I hope you're relatively dry. And it's a challenge for all of us. Even some of the folks inside, the roof's been leaking. But if you could take a few minutes and just tell us about Opportunity at Work, what it's been doing, its roots with tech hire, and where it's going.
Sure. Thank you, everyone, for your grace. I am not relatively dry. I'm all the way wet, so it's okay. So Opportunity at Work was established in 2015 about 2 years ago, and it started at the same time that the White House launched an initiative called Tech Hire under the Obama administration. And our mission is to make sure that Americans can work, learn, and earn to their fullest potential, and that they have access to any job that they have the skills for. So it's a very basic mission. What administration is it? Well, so let's focus on the Obama administration. At the end of the Obama administration, Tech Hire was handed over to Opportunity at Work. Tech Hire is our field operation. We are in 72 cities across the nation, and what we do is work with communities to establish an ecosystem where it can be clear for people what the on-ramp is to tech careers, right? So there are multiple things. We try to eliminate barriers that relate to pedigree, degree, and network. So as it relates to your network, oftentimes we get jobs because a friend of ours said, hey, they're hiring at my job, or someone in an organization might say, do you know of anyone, Kalila, who might fit the skill set that we need here? And I would tap someone on the shoulder from my network and say, hey, I know the person hiring for this role, why don't you try it? And so they leverage my network to get into a position. Likewise, when it comes to degree, as we just heard, oftentimes organizations don't know how to screen for talent. So they put false barriers in front of people, like a bachelor's degree. Except if I have been playing World of Warcraft in my mom's basement since I was 16, dropped out of high school, but can code in 14 languages, you don't see me, you automatically screen me out, right? You're not screening me in to figure out, hey, I have this awesome GitHub portfolio, and you can see that I can do much more than possibly people you already have in your organization because they have a bachelor's degree, right? And so the third is pedigree. And pedigree is really a big thing that implicates the like me bias. And the like me bias is, if you're like me, I believe you have talents that you may not have just because you've done things that I've done. It's a little self-centered, right? So I went to MIT. If you went to MIT, surely you can do this job. It's not possible that you're an idiot, that you didn't do much while you were in school. You kind of coasted through because you're some kind of savant. You were able to get everything done and get good grades, but you really don't know how to work with people, cultivate ideas, do product development. You just have this degree. We are trying to help build ecosystems for the millions of Americans who don't have that network, that degree, or that pedigree. And so people become overlooked and underrepresented in the tech sector because of those things. And we know that you need a ground game. Technology will not solve everything. You need a ground game for people who don't trust systems and whose systems have failed for hundreds of years, whether it started with enslavement or it started with genocide. There are people who don't trust the system even when they know how to use technology. So how do they break through to networks, or how do they break through not having the right pedigree, or break through not having a degree even though they have the skills? Tech Hire is committed to helping communities think about how to use community-based organizations, tribal leadership, tribal networks, unusual suspects, K-12 partners, to show people what steps they need to take to first get the training that they need, whether it's short-term training through a coding boot camp or an associate's degree or a bachelor's degree, whether it might be that their own big company has a training program that they did not know about, right, that they're stuck in the mailroom, but their company is trying to cultivate talent into middle skilled positions. And with civic leadership and employers in those communities to really come together to cultivate talent that is already there. So we believe that there is a demand economy, not that people are supply. People will cultivate this, right? And so Opportunity at Work is building tools to make sure all of these players can kind of work together to help weed people into tech careers as opposed to weeding them out.
I really like that phrase, a demand economy.
Demand.
I like
People
that.
should want to demand a company,
Absolutely.
right? Because they're saying they want to hire inclusively. Sure. And when our marketplace cultivates those businesses that say, we want you, if you have the skills, we want you. Forget your network, pedigree, or degree.
There's choice on both sides.
That's right.
Absolutely.
Yep.
So we spent most of this time talking about the great work that each of your organizations are doing, but if it were easy, everyone would be doing it. So can you share with us some of the hard challenges that you've run into along the way?
I'll start. Just because government is not always recognized as being the most flexible or quick-moving institution, I think that first of all, just getting off the ground an entity within government that provided a platform for industry to articulate their demands and to connect with these major infrastructure systems was a good start. But it is still a challenge to ensure, as we talked about a little bit before, that regulations are actually accommodating rapid change while ensuring consumer protection. It is really hard to do that and do that smartly, and not to throw New York under a bus, but I think we haven't quite figured this out at a state level or even at a local level, although we are certainly making progress. So the challenge is, how do you bring everyone to the table to be able to truly identify what is going to help individuals and companies while providing a framework that still ensures everyone has access. Certainly industry partnerships are not unique, even though they are not a widely recognized form of government or haven't been widely proliferated. Tech Hire and Opportunity at Work are helping to spread some of those models across the board, and they're things that can be adopted in any city where there is demand and where there are partners who are willing to come to the table.
Yeah, I mean, I would plus one to that. Having worked our way through various regulatory processes around the world, New York has the fine distinction of being the worst. But you know, that's usually not a sort of serious barrier once you get through those hurdles, but they do kind of constantly, you know, nag at you. I think at the end of the day, two big problems that we run into. One, even though the bulk of General Assembly students have a college degree, we still get a lot of pushback from companies. So to your point, I mean, it's still difficult to get companies to think differently about where they hire from. So if they're used to recruiting out of certain schools, thinking about an accelerated program, there are many companies who won't even think about it. So we have a lot of sort of hand-to-hand combat, you know, with different employers, you know, all around the world, where we're trying to, you know, work with them to think about different ways of hiring and different paths for people. And again, if these are folks with college degrees, think about how much harder it is for people without those college degrees or those pedigrees. So, and then the other problem is related to what I mentioned before, which is, you know, as we think about expanding access to our programs, I think, you know, we are mindful of the fact that we have, you know, certain things that are, you know, we are experts in and certain things that we are not. So, you know, supporting students who have sort of different life circumstances, who need additional supportive services, who need, you know, childcare, transportation, other types of support that we don't necessarily provide, you know, we want to do more to serve those folks, and that means partnering with organizations who have those areas of expertise. That means, you know, really rigorously supporting students before, during, and after these programs, and getting to a place where, you know, we feel like we can give students the full experience that our other students would have, even if they've faced barriers to education or employment in the past. And so that's certainly a big focus area of ours, and I would say it is difficult, and it really hinges on finding the right partners.
So I would piggyback on plus one to the slow pace of building those relationships inside of government and with other partners, and also wraparound support. So sometimes people struggle to name racism and inequity as a barrier, and then unpacking how that manifests. And so if you are a first-generation citizen to this country, if you are, frankly, not a young white guy whose parents' house you can live in while you do a 6-month coding camp and have the $20,000 to drop on the program, you are behind. Now, let's say I give you the $20,000. Then you have this situation where I have $20,000, but if my grandmother gets sick next month, I have to stop the program that I've now given the $20,000 to. I don't have the resources that will allow me to find the childcare, that will allow me to actually develop the tools that helps me to persist or to translate the resilience and grit that I have already that does not look the same to the general public or mainstream public, right? I have resilience and grit because I was able to come to you and say, I want to enroll in General Assembly, right? So I have it, but do you see it, and can you help me translate that to a way to use the skills I know how to use on the street to make sure my kids eat, to be able to use that to persist through this 6 months so I can get to the other side and show what I have to employers who are willing to see me, so.
John, can I add one more thing to that?
Absolutely.
Which is, even in an ecosystem, yes to all of this, and even in an ecosystem where you have willing partners, where you have employers who get it, who want to find that talent, who are open to looking at skills differently. Individual companies still do not have the time, bandwidth, resources to look at every single possible source across the sun where they would find people, which is why partnerships like this, tools that validate talent, et cetera, are so important, because even the most willing, excited, willing to put their dollars and resources on the line employers don't have a $20 million HR budget or 100 people to help do that work, which is why partnerships are essential.
If I could also say, so Caper Center just released the Tech Leavers report, and I tweeted about it earlier. The reason people leave oftentimes is because the organization is not conducive. So oftentimes we think we are fixing a deficit. Employers say there is not the talent, which I would push up against and say there is the talent, but are organizations willing to change to be the places that people both want to come to and to stay? So that gets back to demand. So if we are only fixing people on a deficit-based strategy, we are not seeing people as assets, and therefore when they get to our organizations, is it a space that's conducive for them to want to stay? And so that other people behind them say, I know someone who works at that company, I want to go there too. And so it makes it easier when you think about what the challenges are if organizations are also willing to shift, and we can frame it around the economic bottom line. We don't have to frame it around social justice, although there is a just reason to do it. The bottom line says if you are not constantly trying to find staff and pay the dollars for your human capital management and influx, you're better off. So why not?
One of the stats I always find kind of staggering is that companies spend over $200 billion every year on recruiting and internal training, yet like the entire Title IV budget, federal financial aid, is only $140 billion a year, right? So companies are letting these jobs sit open. I mean, that's hurting their bottom line. This is actually in their economic interest to invest in talent like this. And one of the things I think we're going to see, and this is an area where we're doing a ton of work and we're working with Opportunity at Work on, is skills-based assessment. So how do companies think about skills-based hiring? Where they don't have the time to sift through all the candidates, what proxies can they use? What assessments can they use to actually have people demonstrate their skills? And that's a big area where we're focused on, and developing assessments in partnership with employers. We've got over 10,000 users of our assessments to date. And so I think that this is something we're going to see more and more of, especially these forward-thinking companies who are saying, okay, I'm willing to look, but I need help. I can't sort through all the noise myself.
So there's a story I'd like to leave you with that I think builds on top of what you just heard. And it's of a woman who went through Tech Jobs Academy, this partnership that we've had with the New York City Tech Talent Pipeline. Her name's April, and she's been a lifelong New Yorker. A handful of years ago, she found herself in an abusive relationship, and she decided it was time to leave. She was a mom. So at that point in her life, she was homeless, living in a shelter, raising 3 kids, working full-time, and going to school, trying to build a better life. But she didn't have access to the tools, to the education, to the networks, to the resources that would help her get there. And when she found out about Tech Jobs Academy, she was one of the first people to apply. She went through a rigorous process to show that she had what it took to succeed, went through the program, and soon afterwards, she didn't just get a job so she could afford an apartment. She got a job with a 3-year contract so she could afford an apartment, and she now has healthcare and benefits for herself and her family. So April's story was actually highlighted by Mayor de Blasio in his annual State of the City address a couple of months ago. And it's exemplary of how a life can be changed and how we can build talent. The talent is here. The people are here who can do this. It's about making the connections to the skills and to the employers. So it's not an easy process. It really isn't. But it's very worthwhile, and it's here at our fingertips, and each of the people up here are working to make this happen and to change the way we create tech talent here in the 21st century. So please, thank you for being here at Smart Cities. Please join me in giving a round of applause to this fantastic panel. And actually, last comment, if you go on the app, you can interact with panelists, not just these panelists, but panelists throughout the conference. And if you have any questions, feel free to come on up. I'm sure that everyone's happy to chat. Thanks so much.
Hi, folks. I'm just going to close this out for the day. I'll let you connect with the speakers on the side. So we've come to the end of 3 days of amazing programming. Great speakers and panelists. You know, thank you to John for heading up this last one, and to Microsoft for being our premier sponsor. Couldn't have done it without you guys, and you know, you've really been in there from the start for us. So thank you. This has been a kind of crazy experience for us. This is our first year. We're looking at this to be an annual conference, so we hope you'll join us again in the future. I think we've been having town hall meetings, smart city town hall meetings here in New York for the last year and a half now. And so it's been really remarkable to see people come from all over the world, not just from New York, but from all over the world, and come together in that same spirit. You know, when we first came at this idea of doing a smart cities show, we looked at the smart cities world and saw a lot of high-tech renderings and glossy buildings and skylines, but at the end of the day, cities are really about the people that live in them, and that was where we came to this idea of powered by people being the kind of narrative, the story behind this. That's why we have the town halls. That's why we invited you all here, because cities at the end of the day are about people connecting with each other and sharing ideas and then going and getting things done. So we're really grateful to you all for coming. We hope you had a great experience. We have an open public day tomorrow where the floor will be open to young kids to come and explore. We're going to be doing a Tech Jobs Academy where we'll be various different employers will be doing a sort of a job fair during the day. So we hope that you'll stick around and join us for that. Hopefully the weather will clear up a little bit. But you know, thank you all so much for coming. I think it's been a bit of a wild ride, but I hope that it was valuable, and we hope to see you at future town halls, which we'll be announcing, and we hope to see you next year.
In the ground we bury the seeds of a pantry, all the fear